The letter came into her hands at 4:30 in the afternoon, on a silver tray she had polished herself that morning. And Alice Weston knew the hand that had written it before she had read a single word of the direction. She was standing in the back passage of Marbury House with the tray balanced against her hip and the November light coming gray through the high window, and the whole of her went still, not the stillness of thought, the stillness of a body that has recognized something before the mind has been given leave to. The capital M in Marbury leaned slightly left. The crossbar of the T did not touch the stem. It floated above it, a little apart, the way a bird's shadow floats a little apart from the bird. She had seen that hand once before, 4 years ago, at 2 in the morning, on a scrap of paper pushed under a door in a house 60 miles from here. The housekeeper's voice reached her from the still room. "Weston, the tray does not carry itself." Alice moved. She had learned to move. She carried the letter up the service stair and along the gallery and into the blue drawing-room where the family took their tea, and she set it down beside the Dowager Lady Marbury's cup, with her eyes on the carpet, and she withdrew 3 steps and stood against the wall where the servants stood. And her heart went on beating in her throat like a thing trying to get out. "From my son," said the Dowager, not looking up. "He arrives Thursday." "His Grace is expected, then?" said the young woman in the ice-blue gown at the window. Miss Caroline Pruitt, who had been staying at Marbury House for 11 days and who had already asked twice, in Alice's hearing, whether the chambermaids might be persuaded to move more quietly on the upper landing. "He is expected," the Dowager said, "and this year he will not be permitted to be tiresome about it." Alice stood against the wall with her hands folded and did not hear the rest. She was 4 years back and 60 miles away, in a corridor with no candle in it, running. Stay with her a moment. What she had just recognized would cost her everything she had built in this house, and she did not yet know it. She had been Alice Weston then, too, though the name had meant something different. Her father had been a country solicitor in a market town in Hertfordshire, a careful man with a careful practice, and when he died in the spring of her 22nd year, he left her a house that was not his to leave, and debts that were. The house went to a cousin she had met twice. The debts went to her. There was £300 owing, and no one to owe it to but the men who came to the door with their hats in their hands, and their eyes already counting the furniture. She had taken a position. That was what a gentlewoman did when the arithmetic went against her. She had taken a position as a chambermaid in a great house in Kent, because a chambermaid did not need a character from a family, only a strong back and a willingness to be invisible, and she had both. The house had been called Ellerby. She did not say the name aloud any more, not even to herself, and she had trained her mouth so thoroughly out of the shape of it that she sometimes went whole seasons without the word surfacing. She had lasted 5 months at Ellerby. 5 months of rising at 4 and going up the back stair with a can that weighed 14 pounds full, of blacking grates until the skin split across her knuckles and healed wrong and split again, of learning that a house of that size has 2 entirely separate weathers in it, and that the servants live in the colder one. She had been good at it, which surprised her. We and all. She had a solicitor's daughter's memory for order, and she never had to be told a thing twice. And by the 3rd month, the housekeeper had given her the family bedrooms, which was a promotion, and which put her on the upper landing at 11 at night. On the last night she had gone up the back stair at 11 with a can of hot water, and Ellerby's heir had been waiting on the landing, and he had not been drunk, which was the part she had never been able to explain to anyone. He had been perfectly sober. She could smell the smoke of the drawing-room fire on his coat, and nothing else, no wine at all, and his neckcloth was still exactly as his man had tied it 4 hours before. He had spoken to her pleasantly. He had asked her whether the water was hot, and she had said, "Yes, sir," and he had smiled at her as though they were 2 people who had met at a gate. He had put his hand flat against the door beside her head and told her in a reasonable voice, as one explains an inconvenience of the weather, that she would find it simpler not to make a difficulty of it. She had made a difficulty of it. She had put the can of water down without spilling a drop, which she remembered with a strange, fierce pride even now, and she had said no, in a voice she had not known she owned, and she had gone into the little room under the eaves and put the chair under the handle and sat on the floor with her back to the door. Until 3. At 2 in the morning a piece of paper had come under that door. She had not lit a candle. She had waited until the footsteps went away, and then she had held the paper up to the square of moonlight in the window and read 11 words in a hand she had never seen before. "The gig is at the west gate. Go now. Take this." Folded inside the paper had been £6 in notes and a name and address in Wiltshire, written in the same hand, of a woman who took in servants without characters and asked no questions of them. Alice had sat on the floor with the £6 in her lap and understood 2 things at once. The first was that somebody in that house knew what had happened on the landing. The second was that whoever it was had known it would happen before she did, because no man writes out an address in Wiltshire in the 4 minutes between a woman saying no and a door closing. She had gone out the scullery window at 2:10, with her boots in her hand and her whole life in a bundle the size of a loaf. The window had a sash that stuck, and she had worked it up an inch at a time with her palms flat on the frame so it would not cry out, and the cold had come in around it and found her wet through with the sweat of the stairs. She had gone across the kitchen garden between the bean rows because the gravel would have spoken. She remembered the smell of the crushed beans. She remembered stopping once at the wall and looking back at the house and seeing one window lit on the 2nd floor, the corner one, and not knowing whose it was. The gig had been at the west gate. It had been there before she reached it, standing in the dark with the horse's breath going up white, and the driver had handed her up without a word and put a blanket across her knees that smelled of dogs, and he had not spoken to her once in 11 miles. 4 years. Wiltshire. First, a boarding house full of women, with no characters and a landlady who asked nothing and charged accordingly. Then Somerset, a clergyman's household, with 5 children and a wife who thought praise made servants idle. Then Marbury House in Berkshire, where she had scrubbed and carried and folded and made herself so small and so useful that the housekeeper had stopped watching her, which was the highest promotion a woman in her position could hope for. In 2 years at Marbury she had not once been late, not once been ill, and not once told a single soul in that servants' hall the name of the county she had come from before Somerset. She had kept the paper. Of course, she had kept the paper. It lived flat inside the lining of her workbox under a card of black thread, and she took it out perhaps twice a year, and the crossbar of the tay-still floated a little apart from the stem. She had never known whose hand it was. She had thought about it for 4 years. The way one thinks about weather in another county, some kindness had passed near her in the dark, and had not stayed to be thanked. Now it was in the blue drawing-room on a silver tray, and it belonged to the Duke of Marbury. He came on Thursday, in rain, and the household assembled in the hall to receive him. Alice stood at the end of the line of servants with her cap straight and her hands behind her back, and watched him come in out of the wet. He was tall, and he moved without hurry, and he handed his hat to the footman without looking at the footman, and there was a stillness about him that she recognized from nowhere at all. 36, she thought, dark hair cut close, a face that gave away nothing and did not seem to be working at it. He went down the line. He did not look at the servants. That was not coldness particularly. That was simply the shape of the world. He stopped at the end of the line. He was looking at her. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. His eyes went over her face, and something happened in them, a flicker, gone as fast as a candle guttering in a draught. And then he turned to his mother and said, "You are well, I hope," and walked past into the house. Alice stood in the hall with her hands behind her back and her whole body ringing like a struck glass. "He does not see them," Miss Pruitt said that evening in the drawing-room to the Dowager, with Alice 5 feet away trimming the wicks. "That is what I admire in him. Some men are forever noticing the girls. He does not see them at all. To him, a chambermaid is a chambermaid and nothing whatever besides. He was raised properly," the Dowager said. Alice trimmed the wicks. Her hands were perfectly steady. She had been trimming wicks for 4 years, and her hands had learned to go on doing their work, while the rest of her was elsewhere entirely. A chambermaid, and nothing whatever besides. She let the words settle where they landed. She had heard worse and would hear worse, and the trick was to let them pass through you like cold air. Through a house she wanted to know. That was the trouble. She had lived 4 years without knowing, and she had been perfectly able to bear it. And now she had 2 seconds of a look in a wet hall, and a capital M leaning left, and she found that she was no longer able to bear it at all. The wanting had a shape, and the shape was a question, and the question was not, "Thank you." The question was, how did he know? The Duke of Marbury did not go up to London that season, which surprised his mother and delighted Miss Pruitt, and made no difference at all to the servants' hall, where it was generally agreed that a duke in residence meant more fires laid, and more silver out, and less sleep for everyone. He kept to the library. Alice had the library in her round, which meant that at 6:30 every morning she went in with her box and her cloths, and knelt at the grate, and cleared out the ashes of his fire while the room was still grey and cold. On the 4th morning he was in it, sitting in the chair by the window with a book he was not reading. At 6:30, having plainly not gone to bed, she stopped in the doorway. "I beg your pardon, Your Grace. I will come back." "Do the fire," he said. She did the fire. She knelt with her back to him and swept out the cold ash and laid the kindling in the pattern the under-housemaid had taught her in her first week at Ellerby, sticks crossed like a hand of cards, and she was aware of him, behind her the way one is aware of a window left open somewhere in a house. "You have not been long at Marbury," he said. 2 years, Your Grace, where before?" The ash-pan rattled once against the fender. She stilled it. "Somerset, Your Grace." And before Somerset, she laid the last stick. "Wiltshire." "And before Wiltshire," said the Duke of Marbury. Alice knelt on the hearth with her hands black to the wrist, and the silence went on for the length of 3 breaths. "Kent, Your Grace," she said. She heard the book close. She did not turn round. "Light it," he said. "Then go and get something hot. You have been up since 5, and you have had nothing." She lit it. She got up with her box, and she went out, and she stood in the passage outside the library door, with her back against the wall and her eyes shut, and she thought, that was not a kindness, that was an order. He gave orders, and they came out of him shaped like orders, and she was a fool for hearing anything else inside them. She went and got something hot. She did not sleep that night or much of the next. She lay in the attic room she shared with 2 other girls and listened to the rain and did arithmetic. He had been at Ellerby 4 years ago. He had been in that house on that night, and he had known which door, and he had known she would run, and he had put a gig at the west gate before she had even said no, which meant he had known what was going to happen to her before it happened, which meant he had known the man. Alice lay in the dark and turned that over and could not make it come out kind. A man who knows what is coming and does not stop it, and only stands ready afterwards with £6 and a gig, is not a rescuer. He is something else. She did not have a word for what he was, and the not having was a splinter under the nail of her. She had wanted to thank him. She discovered, at 2 in the morning, in an attic in Berkshire, that she also wanted to ask him why he had not simply come up the stairs. In the 3rd week of November, the Dowager gave a dinner for 22. It was for Miss Pruitt, though nobody said so. The Pruitts had 11,000 a year, and a great deal of polish, and a daughter who had been told since she was 15 that she would be a duchess, and the Dowager had decided that this was the season it would be settled. Alice carried coal and hot water and folded linen for 2 days, and did not go to bed at all on the 2nd. At 6 o'clock she was on the back stair with an armful of table linen when Miss Pruitt came out of the morning room in front of her. "Not that stair," Miss Pruitt said. "Not while the flowers are being carried up. Go round." "Yes, miss." Miss Pruitt paused. She looked at Alice with a small crease between her brows, the way one looks at a chair that has been moved. "You are the one he speaks to." Alice said nothing. "In the library, Bessie tells me." Miss Pruitt's voice did not rise at all. It was a pleasant voice. "You understand that it is nothing. He is a great reader, and he does not notice who is in the room. A chambermaid is a chambermaid, and a duke does not see her, and if she begins to imagine otherwise, she will be turned off without a character, and there will be no gig waiting at any gate for her. Alice's arms went cold from the elbow down. She had not said the word gig. She had never said it, not in 4 years, not once, and it had just come out of a stranger's mouth in a corridor at Marbury House. "Go round," said Miss Pruitt, and went in to dress. Alice went round. She carried the linen down and along and up the other stair, and into the dining room, and laid it on the sideboard, and her hands were steady, and her face was empty, and inside her a door had come open onto a black stairwell. Somebody had told. Somebody in this house knew where she had come from. She thought of the housekeeper. She thought of the letter on the tray. She thought, with a lurch, of the Duke in the library asking her in that level voice, and before Wiltshire, as though he already had the answer, and only wanted to hear whether she would lie. She served at that dinner. There were 22 at the table, and the apron was full of hothouse roses, and the candles went down the middle of it in a line, like a lit road, and Alice stood at the sideboard with the other maids, and moved when she was signaled to move. The Duke sat at the head, Miss Pruitt sat at his right hand in the ice-blue gown. The Dowager sat at the foot, with her fan folded and her eyes going up and down the table like a woman counting stock. Halfway through the second course, a man called Mr. Rowley, who had come from Kent, and who had been talking about the price of hops for 11 minutes, said, "You will not have heard, Marbury. Young Ellerby has died. 6 weeks ago of fever." The room went on. The room did not care. Somebody asked whether the estate went to the brother Alice. Standing at the sideboard with a dish of asparagus in her hands, felt the name go through her like a wire. She looked at the Duke of Marbury. He had put his glass down. That was all he had done. His hand was flat on the cloth beside it, and his face was exactly as it had been, and he was looking at nothing at all. And Alice, who had spent 4 years learning to read the small movements of people who did not know she was in the room, saw his jaw set once and let go. "I had heard," he said. "Yes, and then," quite steadily to Mr. Rowley, "the hops. You were saying it was a poor year." The dish shook in Alice's hands. She set it down. Nobody saw. She was a chambermaid and nothing whatever besides. He found her the next morning at 6:30 in the library, which meant that he had come down to find her because his fire was already lit. He was standing at the window with his back to the room. "Shut the door," he said. She shut it. Her hands were black already from 2 grates, and she held them away from her apron. "Ellerby," said the Duke of Marbury to the window. "You were there." "Yes, Your Grace. 5 months." "Yes, Your Grace, you left in September at night." Alice stood in the middle of the library, with the grey light coming in around him and her heart going and going. "How do you know that, Your Grace?" she said. He turned round. She had never seen his face in full light before, not properly, not straight on. He looked as though he had not slept in a week. "Because I wrote the note," he said. There it was. 4 years of not knowing, ended in 6 words. In a cold room at 6:30 in the morning, Alice found that she was not grateful. She found, with something like horror, that what came up in her was not gratitude at all. "You knew," she said. "Yes, you knew what he was. Yes. Before." "Yes," said the Duke of Marbury. "Then why did you not come up the stairs?" The silence in that library was the loudest thing she had ever stood inside. "Because I was 3 doors along," he said, "and I did not hear you until you had already said no, and by the time I reached the landing he had gone down the other way, and I stood outside your door for a quarter of an hour, with my hand up to knock, and did not knock, because I was a man in a corridor at midnight, and you had just had one of those. And I could not think of a single thing I might have said through that door that would not have frightened you worse." He stopped. He had not raised his voice once. "So I wrote it down," he said. "It was the only thing I could put through a door that could not put a hand on you." Alice stood with her black hands held away from her apron, and could not speak. "I have thought about that quarter of an hour," he said. For 4 years. He picked up his book from the table, which was a thing to do with his hands and nothing more, and he said without looking at her, I went to his father the next morning. I was told that young men are young men. I took my horse and I left the house, and I have not spoken to an Ellerby since. And last night I learned that he died in his bed at 29, with nothing in the world having ever gone against him but one chambermaid on a landing who said no. He put the book down. You said no, he said, in that house. With nothing. You put the water down first. Alice's throat closed entirely. How could you know that? She whispered. There was no water on the floor, said the Duke of Marbury. In the morning, the can was standing against the wall upright, and the floor was dry, and I have never in my life been able to stop seeing it. He crossed the room. He stopped a yard short of her, which was a yard she felt the whole width of. Go and wash your hands, he said, and go to bed. You have been up since 4. It was an order. It came out of him, shaped exactly like an order. She went. At the door she stopped, because she had one thing left, and it had been in her mouth for 4 years. Thank you, Alice said. For the gig. She did not sleep. She lay in the attic with the rain on the slates, and her hands clean and her eyes open, and she made herself say it plainly. Once, in the dark, because a thing not said plainly cannot be dealt with. She had begun, at some point she could not date, to listen for his step in a corridor, not to fear it, to listen for it. She turned her face into the pillow at the shame of it. A woman in her position, with no character, and no money, and no name, that would open any door in England, letting her body do that. Her body had not asked her leave. It had gone ahead and learned the particular sound of one man's boots on a stone passage, the way it had once learned the shape of a word she would not say, and there was no undoing either. And it was nothing. It could be nothing. There was no arrangement in the world in which it could be anything. And she knew that with the same cold clarity with which she knew the price of coal, and she lay there and wanted him anyway, wanted the yard he had left between them closed, and put her hand over her own mouth in the dark. If she had been able to stop there, she might have been safe. The Dowager sent for her 4 days later. Alice stood in the middle of the Dowager's sitting room on a turkey carpet with her hands folded, and her cap straight, while the Dowager Lady Marbury looked at her for a long time, over the top of her spectacles. How long have you been in this house? 2 years, my lady. You came from Somerset. Mrs. Hale has your character from Somerset. She does not have one from anywhere before Somerset. The Dowager took off her spectacles. I have had a letter from Kent. Alice's hands did not move. A housekeeper at Ellerby, who is now at Rowley's, remembers a girl of your description who went out of a window in the night in September 4 years ago, having got herself into some difficulty with the young master, and was never heard of again. The Dowager folded the letter. I do not care what happened in Kent. I want that understood. I am not a cruel woman, and I am not interested in the morals of housemaids. She stood up. I am interested in my son, she said, who has not spoken more than 11 consecutive words to anyone in this house in 3 years, and who has now twice come down to the library at 6:30 in the morning to speak to a girl with a coal box. I am interested in Miss Pruitt, who has 11,000 a year and a mother who is watching. And I am interested in the fact that a woman with no character and a history in Kent is standing on my carpet at this moment and does not have the wit to be frightened. I am frightened, my lady, Alice said. Good. The Dowager put her spectacles in their case and snapped it. You will leave on Friday. You will be given a character for 2 years' clean service at Marbury, and I will make it a good one, which is more than any other woman in England would do for you. And you will go, and you will not write, and he will be told on Saturday that you gave notice. Alice stood on the carpet. You think me hard, said the Dowager Lady Marbury. I am protecting a house that has stood 400 years from a chambermaid who has been in it too. You are a chambermaid and nothing whatever besides. If you were in my place you would do precisely the same, and you know it. The dreadful thing, Alice thought, standing there, was that she was not. Entirely wrong. Friday, said the Dowager. The carrier goes at 8. She had until Friday. She had 2 days. She did not go to him. She thought about it for one whole night, and did not go. And the reason was not pride, and it was not obedience. The reason was that she had seen his face when Rowley said the name, and she had watched him stand in a library and tell her about a quarter of an hour outside a door, and she knew, with a certainty, that had no evidence behind it at all, that if she went to him now and said the word turned off, he would come down that stair and set fire to his own house to stop it. He would do it in front of his mother and Miss Pruitt and the entire county, and he would do it because he had not knocked on a door 4 years ago and had been paying for it every day since, and it would not be for her. It would be for the quarter of an hour. She would not be his second chance at a landing in Kent. She had put the water down herself. She had gone out of the window herself. She had scrubbed her way across 3 counties herself, and she would not now be picked up like a dropped thing and carried, however kindly, into a life where every soul in it knew she was there, because a great man had needed to feel better about a night in September. If he wanted her, he could want her in daylight in front of them, knowing what she was, and if he did not, then she would go on Friday, and that would be the truth of it. And she had survived worse truths. She did her work. On Thursday morning she went into the library at 6:30, and he was not there, and his fire was cold. And she knelt and cleared the ash and laid the sticks crossed like a hand of cards and lit it, and she stood a moment in the doorway, looking at the room where she had learned who he was. Then she went down and helped carry the plate up for the ball. The Dowager had given a ball on the Thursday of the 3rd week of November for 19 years without a break. And this year, it was to be the night Miss Pruitt was settled, and the whole house had known it for a month. By 9, the ballroom at Marbury House was lit end to end. 60 candles in the 2 chandeliers and 40 more in the sconces, and the terrace doors black with the November night behind them, and the musicians in the gallery, and the floor chalked in a pattern that would be gone by midnight. The Dowager sat in state at the top of the room with her fan held at exactly the height it had been held at 19 times before. Miss Pruitt stood at her hand in ice blue with pearls at her throat. The Duke of Marbury came in at 9:30 and did not dance. Alice was not in the ballroom. Alice was on the gallery stair with a tray of glasses, because a maid who is leaving on Friday still carries glasses on Thursday, and she came round the turn of the stair at 10 o'clock into the noise and the light and stopped, because Miss Pruitt was standing at the foot of it, and she was not alone. "There," said Miss Pruitt pleasantly to the 3 ladies with her, and her voice carried the way a voice carries when its owner intends it to. "That is the one I told you of. That is the girl who runs out of houses in the night. Ellerby. In Kent, she goes out of windows. A chambermaid, and nothing whatever besides. And now she leaves us tomorrow, and I am sure we are all very sorry." The music was between dances. That was the thing Alice would remember. The music was between dances, and the room was quiet in the way a room is quiet for perhaps 4 seconds twice an evening, and Miss Pruitt's voice went out across the whole of it and hit the far wall faces turned. Not all of them. Enough of them. Alice stood halfway up the gallery stair in her print gown and her cap, with 14 glasses on a tray and 140 people looking at her, and the thing that happened in her chest was not grief. Grief came later. What happened in her chest was a kind of falling. A long open drop, 4 years of scrubbing and folding and being so small and so useful that nobody watched her, and all of it gone in 11 words from a woman in ice blue. Somebody laughed. Somebody at the back who had not heard properly and thought it was a joke. Alice did not drop the tray. She would think about that afterwards for the rest of her life. Her hands did not move. She stood on the stair with 14 glasses perfectly level and looked down at Miss Pruitt and said nothing at all, because there was nothing to say that would not be a defense, and she would not defend herself in this room to these people. The Dowager's fan had stopped, and the Duke of Marbury crossed the floor. He came from the terrace doors, from the far end of the room, and he did not hurry, and he did not push, and the crowd came apart in front of him the way a crowd does when it recognizes that it has not understood something. He did not look at Miss Pruitt. He went past her as though she were furniture. And he came to the foot of the gallery stair, and he stopped, and he looked up. The room held its breath. 140 people, and the musicians in the gallery with their bows down, and the candles, and the black windows. He held up his hand to her. Alice looked at the hand. She looked at his face. In 4 years, no one had offered her a hand, up or down anything. She put the tray on the stair rail. She put it down carefully, and it did not slide. And later, a footman would take it away, and nobody would ever say a word about it. She came down 3 steps and put her hand in his. His fingers closed round hers, black with coal dust at the knuckles, where she had not got it all out, in front of the entire county. "Alice," he said. Her given name in his voice, for the first time it went through her like the wire the other name had been. Then he turned, still holding her hand, and looked at the room and said it. "This is Miss Weston. I am asking her to marry me." 9 words. He said nothing else. He did not explain, and he did not defend her, and he did not tell them about a landing in Kent or a can of water standing upright against a wall, because all of that was hers and not theirs, and he had understood that without ever being told. The silence went on for a length of time Alice was never afterwards able to measure. Miss Pruitt said, "Your Grace," and it came out with a crack in the middle of it, and then, "You cannot," and then nothing at all, because there was nothing else in the script, and she had reached the end of it, and there was no more. Behind her, one of the 3 ladies she had brought to watch took a small step sideways. Away from her, it was a very small step. Everyone saw it. The Dowager Lady Marbury sat at the top of her own ballroom, with her fan closed in her lap, and Alice, looking straight at her across 100 feet of chalked floor, watched her understand. Because the Dowager had been watching her son for 3 years. She had said so herself, on her own carpet, 4 days ago. She had seen a man who did not speak to anyone come down at 6:30 in the morning to a girl with a coal box, and she had known exactly what it meant, and she had been so certain that the knowing was a danger that she had never once considered it might be an answer. The Dowager opened her fan, closed it, opened it. Then she stood up, in front of 19 years of the same 140 people, and she inclined her head, not to her son. To Alice. It was not warm. It was not forgiveness. It was a woman of 71 performing, in public, the only correction available to her, and doing it immediately, because she had been raised properly, and because the alternative was to be wrong out loud for the rest of her life. The musicians, who had been waiting for somebody to tell them what the world was, now began to play. "Mr. Play." End quote. Marchand, the family solicitor, who had been at the ball because he was always at the ball, was heard to remark to the gentleman beside him that there was nothing whatever in the settlement that made it difficult, that his Grace had been of age for 15 years, and that the Marbury estate was not entailed on a wife's fortune and never had been. That was the whole of the procedure. It took 11 seconds, and it closed the door for good. They were married in the parish church at Marbury, on the 4th of February, in the snow, with 30 people in it, and no more, which was fewer than had been at the ball and exactly as many as she wanted. The Dowager came. She sat in the second pew in gray and did not smile, and afterwards she took Alice's hand for a moment in the porch and said, "You did not drop the tray," which was, Alice understood, the closest thing to an embrace that woman had left in her, and Alice took it as one. Miss Pruitt did not come. She married a baronet in Shropshire the following year and was by all accounts tolerably content, and the Dowager wrote to her every Christmas until she died. That night, Marbury House was quiet. The ballroom was shut. The candles were out in the sconces, and the chalk was long gone from the floor, and the snow came down past the black windows in the way snow comes down, when there is no wind at all, straight and unhurried, taking its time. Alice sat on the rug in the library at 11:30. with her shoes off and her back against the chair he was sitting in. And the fire she had not laid burned, in the grate she had cleaned 400 times. His hand was in her hair. Neither of them had said anything for a while. "I have something of yours," she said. She had brought her workbox down. She opened it and took out the card of black thread and lifted the lining. And under the lining was a piece of paper, folded into 8, worn soft as cloth at the creases, the ink gone brown. She put it in his hand. The Duke of Marbury unfolded it and looked at his own writing for a long moment, at the capital that leaned left and the crossbar that floated a little apart from the stem, and his hand was not entirely steady, and he did not say anything at all. "4 years," Alice said. "It was in the lining. I did not know whose it was." "You kept it. I kept it," she said. "It was the only thing anybody ever gave me that did not want something back." He folded it again along its own worn creases, carefully, the way one handles a thing much older than it is, and gave it back to her. She put it in the box. Then she put the box on the hearth, and leaned her head back against his knee, and watched the snow go past the black glass. Somewhere above them the house creaked and settled the way old houses do. The fire moved. In the morning, she would wake in a room she did not have to clean, and there would be a girl of 19 from the village laying the grate, and Alice was going to be up at 6:30 to make quite certain that girl was given something hot before she started. She had put the water down first. That had always been the whole of it. If Alice's story stayed with you, sit with it a moment before you go. Thank you for staying until the end.